Albanians cannot change. It's a saying I hear often, and it's always hard to hear. Even more so by the mouth of a 16-year-old boy taking part in the discussion on social and gender norms in the last study conducted last autumn, in the midst of a pandemic. Children and parents came together, shared, talked, struggled, and then spoke some more. They spoke of a culture of acceptance and tolerance of violence in Albanian society. It was hard to hear a mother from North Albania talk of her childhood. When I was a child, she said, I took a stick with me from home for the teacher to beat me if I wasn't studying. I was raised like this. I identify with this. That's why I allowed my child's teacher to do the same to my child 20 years later. She thought she deserved it, and that made it okay. Children and parents justify violence and do it even more strongly so if the child has made a mistake. Children said that their peers and their families aren't fully aware of all various types of violence and often do not identify them as such. Mild bullying, hitting is often not considered violence at all. They said that violence is accepted when used for self-protection. As a group of boys said, if someone hits you or harms you, revenge is justified. You have to hit back. That's how boys are raised. Also, many children consider violence a strength and a value in itself. They spoke of how their parents asked of them to stand up and solve their problems on their own. There was a 13-year-old girl. She was a very good student. She studied very hard. She was also bullied. She never opened her mouth. She didn't want her father to be disappointed that his good student daughter wouldn't take care of her problem on her own. They spoke of traditional attitudes to power, required obedience to authority figures that put boys and girls in a low position of power, which then makes them vulnerable to violence. Even their parents shared that they felt the same about themselves too. So many rules. You would think they would regulate behavior, but rules aren't necessarily about regulation. They are mostly about regularity. So if the rules are wrong, the same behaviors will indeed repeat themselves with regularity. The same happens with gender norms that produce violence, sexual harassment, and abuse, sometimes very extreme, as in the case of a 15-year-old boy beaten by his friend and told by his father, if you don't go and kill that boy, you are no longer my son. Can you imagine a father telling to his own son to do that? They called it male honor. And you know what happened next? The boy killed his friend, and by doing so, destroyed his own life too. That was what was required of him. That's what's required of boys. They are also raised to be the protector of their family, and that may ask for violence too. Both boys and girls are expected to preserve traditional gender roles. Girls are more restricted into their movements after school. They are told that they should stay at home after 5 p.m. Otherwise, no one knows what might happen. And if it happens, the blame is on them. They are judged for their freedom, harassed, raped, and after that there is public shaming and victim blaming. Media too hunts for the next day's prey, only to forget fully next week without any care about the victim's fate. Can you imagine you can protect your daughters only by staying home after 5 p.m.? Do you want to live in that world? It is an ugly one when girls, victims of sexual violence, are judged by the community for their actions and many of their own peers stigmatized, and forced to bear the burden of negative reactions, sometimes even forced to marry their perpetrator and often move to another place to live. They are blamed for the boy's behavior. As one girl said, they will say that the girl wanted it and provoked him. Community considers sexuality a marker of masculinity. So boys aren't blamed for their actions. Boys will be boys' attitudes. Boys' sexual perpetrators aren't publicly shamed as their victims are. All this is kept unchanged in the darkness, covered by the veil of the so-called privacy, which in fact perpetuates damage. The school psychologist said that girls, victims of sexual violence, won't report what happened to them, because then the community will learn about it and they will have to suffer further. Children say that talking about sexuality is a taboo, something that never or rarely happens in their classrooms. Their teachers are embarrassed to face the topic. Talking about sexual violence is even more of a taboo, so strong that children missed listing it as a type of violence without being prompted to do so. In particular, there is almost no talk on sexual violence against boys. So, can Albanians change, or are they stuck in old norms? Fortunately, there is another side to this story. There is light trying to break the darkness. There is shame for complying in parents, like the mother from North Albania who was very embarrassed that she didn't protect her child from the teacher's abuse. There are parents who will stand up for their children, like the mother was the only one to say in front of a whole group of parents that children cannot be touched and humiliated. And this is not okay, no matter the circumstances. Her children cannot be touched. There are teachers who won't leave the children alone, like the beloved teacher whose talks on sexuality are so precious to her students, or like the ones who invite children to share their burden and will keep their confidentiality. There are children who will stand up and protect their peers who are being bullied and will dare to face the consequences. There are children who confront the adults and challenge norms, like the girl who said to her father, "You are from another generation. I don't need this. I need my freedom." There are many children who know rules have to change. They even know how it should be done, and they are telling us about it. Their main hope and vision is to start talking about it in the community, for peers to start supporting each other, for parents to stop gossiping and punishing and start being in the side of the children so that all children can be protected from violence. This is a message they want everyone in the country to hear. So let's start doing that by focusing on prevention rather than treatment for the whole community, but especially for children at risk, by implementing properly what's already in place, by putting highly trained psychologists and social workers in schools and in child protection units, by making media accountable and ethical, a partner in fighting child violence, by strengthening children's agency through building good peer support programs in schools to fight bullying, supported by teachers, by working in the community and strengthening fighting voices through making them talk together and support each other. Young Albanians can change. They can break the generational chain. They are even telling us how it should be done. They came to tell us that in the midst of a pandemic, they need us to listen. We cannot change our past, but we can help them change their future. Young Albanians can change, and Albanians will change.